Hi everybody. I know this is weird. Typically I would be in person in front of you and we'd all be meeting together for our annual meeting, but because of COVID we're not able to do that, so I'm just gonna run through everything that I would in person with you, and then that way we're able to still meet our requirements for safety. First things first, you're gonna have a packet in front of you. The first page should look like this and say HIPAA quiz. You're going to have the HIPAA quiz, then you'll have a active shooter paper, the fire prevention quiz, and then a 2-page little stapled packet that just talks kind of a brief rundown about our fire policy. When you're viewing this and viewing the OSHA videos, you'll have like a master packet that everybody will kind of share as they're taking the quizzes. There will be a master packet for the HIPAA quiz and a master packet for the fire quiz. So that won't be in your individual packet because those everybody will share. If that's something that you'd like a copy of after you're done with this, let us know and we'll be happy to get you a copy of it. I know that a lot of people already have copies maybe in their drawer or don't have need for one afterwards. So after you complete your HIPAA quiz, after you complete watching this video and filling out all the quizzes, and the OSHA video and that quiz, please come and see me because there's a paper that I need you to sign that will say, you know, that you've done it on top of turning in the quizzes. In addition, at that time, I'd like to check and make sure we have your current cell phone number and that the emergency contact that we have for you is current. And that's just in case something happens. If something happens in the office and you're not here and I need to be able to get a hold of everyone, I need to make sure that that list of cell phone numbers is current. And also, if something happens to you while you're here at work, we want to be able to contact the correct person. So if you have the wrong emergency contact, then we'll be calling the wrong person. So that's all of the sort of administrative part of this. Now I'm going to review some things. I'm going to talk about HIPAA with you. You will have a master copy that will look like this. It should say master copy on the top. And this isn't necessarily the full HIPAA policy per se, but this is a good reference guide for our employees. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to make sure to touch on. So I'll review those with you now. First things first, I right now am the HIPAA compliance officer. So if there's any questions or concerns, or if you know there is a HIPAA violation, then those need to be coming through me. Protected health information, that is anything that can identify a patient. That's their medical record number, that's their, which in our account, any clinical, it's called an account number. But it's any of their demographics, address, telephone number, any images of the patient, or even anything about the patient's actual, you know, health, what's in their chart. Billing information would be something else. Insurance information, those would be considered protected health information. There is highly confidential information. Fortunately, we don't deal with that much here. That's going to be developmental disability, abuse or neglect, sexual assault, HIV/AIDS. There may be some of that in our charts, but more often than not, it doesn't include that. I will tell you, please review the section that says highly confidential information, because that does need to be handled a little bit differently than regular records. So you are able to fax protected health information. You know, you can fax medical records, no problem. However, every single time that you are faxing medical records, you need to have a cover sheet. When you're faxing straight out of eClinical, it automatically will put a cover sheet in for you, so that's not a problem. But when you're faxing, when you're hand faxing something, it always has to have a cover sheet. That's just something that I have noticed lately that some people don't do, so I want to make sure that everybody is doing that. If you fax something to the wrong place, come talk to me. It tells you exactly what to do in this, in the master copy. It tells you what to do, and we will go through all those steps, but start by coming to tell me and we'll go through those steps together, and that way I can be ensured that everything's been done correctly and documented correctly. A big thing that I wanted to review is, can I access my family member, friend, or coworker's PHI? The answer is no. If there's an employee that works here that also sees a doctor here, the only people that should be in that chart are the people who have an absolute reason to be. So the doctor themselves, possibly the doctor's MA, or you know, someone, you know, maybe Laura billing, and she wouldn't even really need to be necessarily in the chart, but there should be no reason for anybody to be in that chart that, you know, isn't in that chain of command, you know, from the doctor. And so I have had to before go through and look at chart access for someone that worked here that saw one of our providers, and then had to go to each person that showed accessing that account to have them to tell me why they were in that account. So keeping that in mind, you know, please do not go snooping through someone else's chart. Just stay out of it unless you absolutely need to be in there. The same thing goes for family member, friends, famous people. Stay out of their charts. Unless you actually have a reason to be in those charts, do not be in those charts. If you have a child or parent that is a patient here, you should still handle their information as if you didn't work here. So you would, if you needed to schedule, if an appointment needed to be scheduled, you would still ask someone to schedule that appointment for them. If they needed a refill, you would go to, you know, their MA, that doctor's MA or triage person, and say, hey, you know, they need a refill, and they'd make a telephone note. It shouldn't be you scheduling the appointment or you making the telephone note. If you accidentally access someone's record that you shouldn't, just get out of it. However, if it happens to be someone that works here, or a famous person or a friend or whatever, come and tell me, just so I'm aware that you accessed it on accident and got out of it. It's better to be upfront about that, because you know, if it comes down to it and I have to do an audit of that patient's chart, I'm going to be asking why you were in it. You can access your own PHI if you are a patient here. However, you can't do anything in your chart. You can look at your chart, but if you need anything to be done, like changing your address or scheduling an appointment, that has to be done by someone else. We have a zero tolerance policy here at Catalina Point. It's very serious. Looking at someone else's stuff, doing anything with any person's information is really serious, and we take it very seriously, up to and including termination. So please be mindful of that. My favorite thing to say is, how would you want your medical records treated at your doctor's office? And, would you want them to leave your information just open on a computer? Would you want them to talk about you in the hallway? Would you want them to fax something without double checking the fax number? No. So, for all those things, we should be taking care of those as well, or the same way we would for ourselves. We oftentimes will have patients come to the front desk or while they're in with like a medical assistant and say, hey, I get a copy of those labs? And that's not necessarily a problem. I would prefer that any time that any records are given out of a patient's account, even if they're given to the patient, that a telephone note is open and we indicate, patient requested labs. labs given while patient was in office, something to that effect. And that is because the patient has the right to come to us and say, I'd like to know every time that records were given out of my chart. And if we don't have that recorded, then we're not giving them correct and accurate information. So some things that we've talked about in the past is just being mindful when we're in a hallway or even talking with other people about a patient, that we keep our voices low, that we use as little information about them as possible so that maybe that can't be identifiable. For example, a nurse comes to speak with a doctor about one of the infusions, then they'll typically bring the billing sheet and say to the provider, this patient, point to the patient's name and say what's going on. And that way they're not, giving away information about the patient, in the hallway or in public. We need as far as for sending medical records, we don't need a patient's authorization if we are sending them to, their insurance so that we can get payment, or another provider for continuation of care. So their primary care doctor, the doctor that referred them, or a doctor we are referring them to. All of those would be acceptable to fax without having the patient's authorization. However, if the patient has strictly said to us that they do not want any of their information sent out to, this X doctor or, a certain place, then we also have to abide by that. It doesn't happen often, but it has happened in the past. So we should be, just taking care to make sure that we're documenting all of those times that we send that out, and that we're keeping careful record in the patient's chart. I know when I've sent medical records, I will go as far as to record the actual fax number that I'm sending it to. And that way, if it doesn't go through or if something happens and they call and say, oh, where did you fax that to? It's right there. The last thing I'll talk about is just the shred bins. I know everybody does a really good job of this, especially if you're not in an office, in like a secluded office like myself or one of the doctors, then your shred bin should be emptied every day. I know some people will just kind of keep their shred all together and throw it away at the end of the day. Some people will just go through and empty all the shred bins in a certain area every day. That's perfect, and we'll look to you guys to continue doing that. As far as for people in offices, as long as the information, is tucked in an office and is sort of out of general view walking by, then that doesn't have to be emptied quite as often. But we just want to be mindful of, trying to keep patients' information safe and from being viewed by, everybody that walks through here. So that's the end of the HIPAA portion. There's probably some questions on the quiz that I didn't necessarily cover, but that's where this master copy will come in handy. So you'll answer those 10 questions, and then we'll move on to this next part. So you'll probably want to pause it now so you can finish those questions, or you can do it at the end. I don't care. The next thing I'm going to talk about is active shooter. And that is something, unfortunately, that is necessary in this day and age for us to talk about. The Department of Homeland Security put out a packet. I took that packet. I've given that packet out in the past, but I hate using it because the background is black, and so the copies are ridiculous. And also it almost gives too much information for what each individual person needs. So I just pared that down and I put that on, just a double-sided paper for you. But it is important to go through. My brother-in-law was in the Army, and, we got to talking about this because at the time I was getting ready to talk to everybody about active shooter, and was just talking to him about it. And he said that in the Army, they frequently will run through drills, run through scenarios over and over again. And the main reason for doing that is because there's fight, flight, and freeze. And freeze is the one that maybe people don't talk about a lot. But the reason that it's important to practice, talk about, review what to do in these situations is because if your brain has no prior knowledge of that, there's a good chance that you'll freeze, because your brain in that instant goes into, sort of a panic mode. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to do the best we can to keep that from happening for any employee. We want you to be able to be, present and act quickly. So the first things that we're going to talk about is being aware of your environment and any possible dangers. And this is just in general. If you go anywhere, you want to kind of just make sure you're aware of what's going on around you. Take note of the 2 nearest exits. So right now, think about where you actually sit and think about what 2 exits are closest to you. So if for example, a shooter came in the front door, where would be your first exit? If a shooter came in through the BTU, where would be your first exit? If the shooter was in an exam room, what would be your first exit? So think through those things. If you're in an office, stay there and secure the door. I know that that may seem counterintuitive. You just want to run. But the best thing to do would be to shut that door, lock it, and put something heavy in front of it. Now, there's a video that they put out that I was kind of thinking about having you guys watch. However, as I watched the video, it made me chuckle a little bit, because in the first scenario, there's 3 people in an office and they shut the door, and there is literally next to the door a small cabinet, and then there's like a desk that's not attached to anything. There's some chairs in the room, and they didn't put a single thing in front of the door. They stuck a door stop behind the door, which would help, but in my mind, they could have moved the cabinet very easily. Then they showed a second scenario where a lady was in a copy room. So basically just like a big room with a door that had the copy machine and paper in it. And she heard the shooting start, and she shut the door and then rolled the copier. And I was like, great, she's going to roll the copier in front of the door. That's so smart. No, she rolled the copier out just a little bit and then like ducked behind it, and you could still see her. So I didn't want to show that video, because that's not what I'm hoping will happen. If you run in an office or in a room, if you're unable to exit the building and you run into a room, or you're already in an office, shut the door and move something in front of the door. Try to prevent that person from being able to get in the room with you. If we're talking about an exam room, the exam tables are mobile. Those move. If there's any loose furniture in the exam room, I know some of them have like a bookshelf or something, and move that in front of it. Don't be afraid of, that it's going to damage that piece of furniture. You're much more important than a bookshelf to us. So think through that as well. If I ran into the closest office to me, what could I put in front of the door? Michelle and I have talked about, we do have a file cabinet right next to our door that possibly we could push over. And we have a smaller file cabinet in here that we could put there. Also, there's chairs that we could stack next to it. So those are just all good things to really run through in your mind. As a last resort, attempt to take the active shooter down. When the shooter is at close range and you cannot flee, your chance of survival is much greater if you try to incapacitate him or her. And then the last thing says, call 911 only when it is safe to do so. So, if you're in an office or if you've made it outside of the building, we do at both front desks have a little silent alarm. Now, we wouldn't want anybody to put themselves at risk trying to hit that alarm. So that's, if you are able to, if you hear it coming from another area and are able to, that's great. Otherwise, I don't want anybody to stress about that. So in that the first thing that I talked about is there's flight, fight, or freeze. In this case, we also have hide, and that would be part of flight because you're actively trying to keep yourself safe. So there's run, And that's, you need to think about having an accessible escape path. So make sure you have an escape route and plan in mind. Wherever you would be, where would you leave the building? Don't grab your belongings. Leave them behind. It's just the same as if we say the building's on fire. You know, you don't want to take that extra minute to get your purse and stuff together if there's someone actively shooting in the building. You know, help others escape if you can. If you're, you know, it's on your way and you see someone maybe frozen, just kind of help them along. Keep your hands visible, and that's important. If you're going out and there's police already here, they don't know who the shooter is. They may not know who the shooter is, so that way they know that it's not you. But if there are not police officers, you know, then once you get out and get safe, call 911. Do not attempt to move wounded people. Sometimes by moving someone who's wounded, we can actually injure them more. The second option is to hide, and we talked about that, hiding in an office or you know, in a closet or behind something, just making sure to get that door shut, lights off, quiet as we can be, blocking the door if possible, so that, you know, the shooter is less likely to be able to get in there or want to come in there. At the same time, maybe silencing your phone. If the shooter is nearby and you're hiding, then you just want to try to remain calm, quiet, hidden behind, you know, furniture, and then calling 911 as soon as you're able again. And then fight again is the last option, and that's only if your life is in imminent danger and that is the only thing left for you to do. You would attempt to disrupt or incapacitate the shooter by acting as aggressively as possible against him or her, throwing items and improvising weapons, yelling, and it also says commit to your actions. I personally never had to fight a person wielding a gun, so I can't speak to, you know, how hard or easy this will be, but, you know, I think that if that's the last thing that we have to do, then it's important to think through those options again, like what's around me that I could throw, what, you know, how could I, you know, go towards a shooter if I had to. Then the last part on this paper is just how to respond when law enforcement arrives. And that's just, again, you know, kind of what you'll expect to see in the, you know, how the people will be dressed, what they'll look like, how many there will be, but also what to do, you know, as they're helping you or as you're exiting the building. Just making sure that you remember that the person who is shooting may not look any different than anybody else to them, and so we want to make sure they're aware that we are not the active shooter. So I know that's a scary situation, and I don't love the fact that we have to talk about it, but I think it's so important to think through that, to have a plan in mind, just like we do fire drills, just like anything, you know, just run through that situation in your head and think about what, you know, what you could do if that situation were to arise. The last thing that you'll be doing, there's no quiz for that. That's, again, that's for your information. The last thing that you'll be doing is this fire prevention and safety quiz. And then you'll be using this little 2-page packet and the master copy of the fire policies in order to answer all the questions in that quiz. And again, once you finish those, then you'll turn on the OSHA video and take that quiz. Then bring all the quizzes back to myself and Michelle, and then we'll verify your cell phone number and verify that we have the correct emergency contact for you. And any questions, please feel free to come to us. We're happy to answer. We just want to make sure we stay up to date, do this yearly, and can really, keep everybody that works here safe. Thanks.